Hi buddy, welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. My name is John Sinclair and my co-host Mark Palavestro.
Hi John, today we've got Frank Lally, the Fleet Manager from Victoria Police. Frank shares with us the challenges that are involved and that he has to face in managing a very diverse police fleet and the pressures around safety, fit for purpose, environment, and also being cost effective.
Yeah, it's a really great discussion and very interesting for both understanding of both dealers and OEMs to understand how they can get some of their police business and what they need to do to get that business. He also covers a few myths that are misunderstood about the police vehicles and the police department. So a really great discussion.
Remember to subscribe and hit the bell below.
So let's jump into it.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services is an independent division of Precar Services, offering specialty fleet fit-outs for commercial applications ranging from simple tray and tow bar fitments to fully bespoke service body and accessory installation. With quality-assured safety, compliance and standardisation of vehicle builds, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. For further information on how Precar Fleet Services can assist in solving your commercial vehicle fit-out needs, please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Fleet managers and their drivers are often lost when it comes to motor vehicle accidents, and knowing what the next steps are can be confusing. We hold your driver's hand every step of the process. At Innovation Group, we process claims right the first time. Innovation Group provides motor claims management, assessing, and accident management services. Our experienced team of people are there to make it easier for the fleet manager and the driver by minimizing touch points between all stakeholders. Innovation Group, leaders in motor accident claims management.
So Frank, welcome to the show. Great to have you on. Maybe just to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of background to what you do?
I worked for the Victorian government. I started in 1979 in the Premier's Department. I was in HR across a range of different streams, whether it would be recruiting. I managed graduate recruiting. I did a lot of employment and staffing practices, discipline matters, moved into FOI, records management. I went back to an area in Premier's Department when Jeff Kennett came in called public sector management. So we were looking at performance of departments against their business plans, and we had to do little write-ups on the department head's performance, as well as doing some public sector policy stuff. I remember I wrote the very first code of conduct for Victoria Police. Not Victoria Police, Victorian Public Service. A few things changed. There was some machinery of government changes. I went into Treasury, and then a guy I worked with in Premiers asked me to come to police, and I did. And I ran the payroll system for a number of years. And then in about 2001, I got asked by another ex-colleague if I wanted to come into fleet, and I didn't know much about fleet, and they said, but we need someone who knows a little bit about management. So I thought, all right, that could be a bit of fun. So I walked into my present job in April 2001. It was exactly the same day Christine Nixon started in Victoria Police, so there was a lot of reform happening there. It was a bit of a baptism of fire because we'd just come out of a situation where 2 people died in a rollover of a divisional van, which really sent shockwaves through our organisation. My job was really to sort of come in and start a program of reform and to get out of the business of modifying vehicles and try to get the manufacturers, the OEMs, to work with us to develop proper police vehicles fit for purpose for us and transfer the risk of us modifying a vehicle onto them. That was a pretty challenging task. So the issue with the Divie van, Ford and Holden stopped making purpose-built panel vans. And we would just basically put a padlock on a panel van and put some wire mesh over the windows, and there's your Divie van, your prisoner pod. Well, when they stopped, we had to come up with something else. So just very quickly, we developed a pod with an engineering company, and we ended up putting a 460 kilogram fiberglass and metal pod in the back of a Holden ute. with, modified suspension and everything else. Now, as a prisoner containment area, fantastic. But we didn't realise what effect it was having on the stability and the performance and handling of the vehicle. The worst thing that could have happened. So a car in Northcote, a divisional van going down High Street, Northcote, literally doing less than 60 k's an hour. They had their lights on, but not the sirens, went to do a right-hand turn and overtake a car. The car didn't see the police car, clipped the back of the van, and it flipped the van on its side. The van ended up sliding into a power pole, but it was one of those poles that hold up the tramway. So it was a solid steel pole. And unfortunately, the 2 members died. So we thought, this is not good. So we engaged Monash Uni Accident Research Centre to have a look at our problems and see how do we use our vehicles, what do we need to do to come up with some standards so that we go forward in a manner that entices the industry to work with us and build these vehicles and get out of the game of manufacturing vehicles ourselves. So they looked at a whole heap of our crash data. One of the things that they did come back with, it was a thing called the chi-square goodness of fit. It was basically looking at the amount of kilometres a vehicle travels and the expected number of rollovers you would have for that type of kilometrage and what the observations were. So I've actually got this written down. So the Ford Falcon Divie van that we had travelled 98 million kilometres, and we had 2 rollovers, where you would have expected for that sort of mileage or kilometre travel, you would have expected at least 5. The Holden that we created, travelling 38 million kilometres in total, we'd already had 11 rollovers in that period of time. But we didn't sort of take much notice of that. So then we did a whole heap of things. You remember the Mengard scale, Mark, that we presented?
The Mengard scale, no, very well.
So there was a guy in America who thought that there was a correlation between the height of the centre of gravity of the vehicle and the number of rollovers that you would expect, or the probability of rollovers. So we did a lot of work with Monash. We looked at all our vehicles, put them on, they've got a tilt table test, which you tilt the vehicle to the angle to the point where the top wheels come off the table. It's all chained down. So, and then you marry that with a double lane change manoeuvre that it tells you the stability factor. And I'm going to muck all this up. But we then got Monash to come back with a series of tests that we should throw all our vehicles through and look at their probability of rollover and their stability factor and tell us whether the vehicles come into a category of gold, silver, bronze and white. So the gold vehicles can go to unlimited speed, having regard to the environmental conditions. The silver vehicle can travel up to, 150 k's an hour. And in police mode, we know that's safe. But that all depends on whether you modify the vehicle or not. So we don't want to modify anything. So they gave us all these tests, including a brake test. So we shared with the industry the type of tests that we were going to put the vehicles through and classify them for our safety standards, and that would determine whether we'd use them in our fleet or not. But part of the challenge also was we wanted the manufacturers to come in and build specialist police vehicles for us. The way we did that, the industry was quite good. They said, tell us what you want and we'll consider it. And the way we did it, we thought, well, hang on, commercially, if you're in the commercial world, you'd actually get a bit of bang for your money. And at the time, we were probably spending $30 million a year in the value of new car changeovers that we were buying. And we thought, that's probably worth a bit of influence. So we sort of said, in exchange for our preference towards you to buy cars off you, what are you going to do for us? And essentially, we want you to actually build us a Divie van. So in the first couple of years, look, we were in the game of getting some rebates back from organisations that would help us in our pursuit of improving the safety of our vehicles. But importantly, we wanted them to come back and actually commit to building a Divie van. And look, we went to all the Australian manufacturers, so it's all pure from a procurement point of view, and Holden decided that they wanted to play. We formed an agreement with them that they would build a prisoner transport vehicle to a national spec. Essentially, it was written around the Holden crewman because it was the only ute around that had 4 doors, and it was a pretty impressive vehicle. So they built it in conjunction with a third-party supplier, and they endorsed it. So the bottom line was they've built it, they've got the Holden DNA, they've done all their engineering tests. We then put it through our performance and handling tests run by independent engineers, and they said to us, that car meets your silver classification, which is essentially the same as a sedan, which is a first responder. It's just gold from a police member's point of view. They can get to the job quick, as if they were driving a sedan, and they had the added luxury of locking a guy or whoever up in the back of a Divie van. So everyone was happy. And that was just the turning point. That was the first Australian manufactured police vehicle in the history of the country, and we bought a lot of them. And a few of the other agencies did too. I think Queensland bought a fair few. That basically enabled us to bring in an original equipment only policy. So we weren't going to bring in and modify any vehicle unless the manufacturers agreed to it. That sort of forced the manufacturers to come back to us and say, well, okay, if you want us to endorse the product, you can't change things on it. And one simple thing is tyres. So they're saying, we've done millions of kilometres of testing on that tyre. You go and change that tyre. Don't expect us to be held accountable for that thing running off the road after you've done your tests. So we would test the vehicle with the OE equipment on it, and you replace it with the OE equipment, including brake pads. Okay? So that was the start. And I've got to tell you that we had cowboys that had different tyres on each corner of the car. So imagine it trying to handle and perform to radial tuned suspension, I think they had in those days, which they've tested it on a particular tyre and calibrated to that. And then we thought, okay, well, we want to use that buying power to get better things. So police packs where we put a wiring harness in, and it gives us the ability to attach all our equipment in there. We had a lot of issues with power supply out of the vehicles, to the point where we then went to the next stage where we said, unless you give us a dual battery system, we won't buy your car. It's amazing how when you do that, you make that statement, they all can come along and assist you. So that was where we started the journey. And look, since then we built another divisional van on the back of a VE Commodore, and that was, I think your good self, Mark, got involved in that. So you came along, we had a tripartite agreement with a mob called Belmont, who now call themselves Centaur Products Australia. And look, that's just been just a fantastic police car for us. We thought we'd get 5 to 10 years out of it. So back when we got to the Commodore being wound down in 16, I think it was, they came along and said we could do something for you on the back of a Colorado. And the pods were still in good nick. And this is after they've held, who knows how many prisoners who kicked the crap out of it. Stood up well. All we had to do was refurbish them a little bit, modify the front storage compartment, slot it straight into a Colorado. And that's a pretty good result from our point of view, because we didn't have to go out and buy brand new pods. We could get out of it by half the cost, if you like. And then a couple of years after the Colorados were in the game, Holden pulled out of Australia, which was rather sad. So we had to find a new platform. And Ford finally came along and said, we'd like to talk to you. And we asked the rest of the industry too. We asked all the manufacturers, but Ford were the only ones who were prepared to come in and endorse the pod on the back of their Ranger. And that's what we launched that in May this year. And that's going to be a long-term vehicle for us, which is good. But the key for us is it enhances the safety of our cars and our employees. So we do things like we run a brake test. So we tell everyone what the brake test is. And if your car doesn't meet it, we won't buy it. As simple as that. So I can tell you, when we first did the brake tests, there's one of our performance Australian-made vehicles that failed the test. When that manufacturer had to go away and come back with a new brake system. It was more about the brake pads. The systems were all pretty robust. All the cars we buy now are spectacular. Everyone's actually looked at that standard and are developing cars in the main that meet those standards. So from a policing point of view, we're pretty happy. That's where the journey started, and safety has been our number one focus, because by us not modifying a car, it means that we're not going to put our guys at risk. So we have not had a rollover with any of the vehicles that we've had produced by a manufacturer since 2001, because you're now, under the workplace legislation, accountable for it all. So, yeah, that's our policy, and we're going to stick to it.
And Frank, another question around safety, because correct me if I'm wrong, I recall there were all the issues when we were jointly developing the pod, and it's great to hear that it's the same pod that's still being fitted now that you and I developed way back in 2008.
That's right.
So, because correct me if I'm wrong, primary focus is your members.
Absolutely.
And their safety. But there was a lot of work that you and your team, in conjunction with input from the members in the police force, for the safety of the occupants of the pod.
The one good thing, we've got a very, very strong police association in Victoria, looks after its members, and as a good union does, they bring these items to you, and they do it on purpose. One, because they want to look after their members. But we turned that around. We just said, and I think you'd remember, Mark, you would come to meetings at Belmont and we would have union members there, including the OH&S representative from the union, because our philosophy is we want to work together with them, and we don't want them to tell us after we've built the thing that there's a problem. Tell us from day one. Be involved, help with the design, understand what the manufacturers are telling us, so you don't come back and complain about something when they're telling you, but hang on, that's the only possible way of doing this, having regard to, say, airbag deployment zones, etc. And we found that invaluable. The union can't come back later and say, oh, we didn't like this, but you were there, you were part of the design. And we unashamedly involve them in everything we do because it's the right thing to do. And now the legislation says, as an employer, you've got an obligation to consult as widely as possible. I don't know who the union members are, but the union comes along and says, okay, we'd like you to talk to Mark Palavestra at Pakenham or John Sinclair up at Mildura. Yeah, no worries. If that's who their rep is, that's fantastic. And I've got to say, 9 times out of 10, all the input's fantastic. Sometimes you get a few crazy comments, but that's okay. It's part of the process. So that's critical from our point of view. And it also brings them on board. So when we introduced this gold, silver, bronze system, we also introduced a parallel driver licensing system. So your licenses reflected the gold classification, silver or whatever. So the person who wanted to drive a highway patrol vehicle can drive it, but you can only drive to the limit of your classification. So if you haven't been trained in a pursuit driving course, which is a 10-day course on top of your 10-day normal driving course, you aren't allowed to drive that car to the limit of the car's classification. You can only drive it to your limit. So, for example, I'm not a policeman, but I can drive it to normal standards. So I've got what they call a white licence, which is posted speed limit. But if you've only been trained to a general duty standard, you can only drive that to the silver standard. Equally, if you've got a gold licence, you can't just jump in a Divie van and drive it to an unlimited speed because the car is limited by its classification. And we put a sticker in every car to say, this is a gold car, this is a silver car, this is a bronze car. So you jump in it, you know what the limitation of that vehicle is. And that's all about their safety.
So, Frank, a question for me is, can you tell us more about the size of your fleet and how long you keep the vehicles and the diversity of vehicles?
Actually, I've got a few stats there. So, look, our fleet's 3,500 and 3 as at the 30th of June. That's the official stat. They're the active vehicles on the road. That's made up from 50 different manufacturers. That's the cross-section of manufacturers we deal with. And that does include snowmobiles and a few odd jobs and tractors and whatever, but they're very small in number. Essentially, we would have something like 685 sedans, 1,700 wagons, 255 Divie vans. We've got over 80 motorbikes, 4x4s, we've got about 120 of them. And look, utes, we've got over 235. And the utes, I'm talking about the Ranger types, the Amaroks. We're moving into them a lot more now because it gives you that ability to have 4 or 5 people in the car and very good storage capability in the back. So with the draw system and whatever. We also have buses. We would have something like probably about 50 buses. And they range from 45-seater coaches that we have at my work to, mini buses to carry, groups of trainees around or whatever. We have booze buses, which you might have heard about. And we have, a heap of trucks. We would have over 25 trucks.
Do you still have that amazing command centre, the mobile command centre?
So we've got that, and we've got 10 small ones as well. So
right. Essentially,
many years ago, we converted an old communications truck to a mobile police facility. We had a bloke who was a bit of a genius. He put a trailer underneath this pipe, and it had an office space that could hold 3 people and a small entry that we converted into a counter so that you could take this thing anywhere. It was a boomer. Everyone loved it. And all of a sudden, we got told, can you build another one? So we did. And then one day I was going to work, and someone said, you just picked up $2.5 million. I said, what are you talking about? They want you to make mobile police facilities. And they liked the little caravan we built. So they basically said, we want to drive a standard license. So we picked a Mercedes Sprinter cab chassis, and we got someone to build a box on the back which had opening sides and the ability to have 3 people sitting in there. And you could go out and, go to a city mall and have like a police PR thing, or you can go there because you had a murder and you just needed an office at the scene and you could have people coming in. But we had a bit of money left over, and we said, look, we desperately need a larger facility to respond to major events. So we got a group of people together, users from the regions, and they said, we need this, we need an area that you got a commander can sit in there and command the operation, and a bigger room that can have, a number of people sitting around to actually do the work, whether they're logistics people, traffic people, crime people or whatever. And I'm saying, this is going to be bigger than Ben Hur. And I'll never forget this because Christine Nixon said to me, you need to go and talk to the blokes. So we ended up with, this is going to be a semi-trailer. And I saw her and I said, we're going to build a semi, Christine. And she goes, all right, Frank. And I said, you told me to talk to your guys. That's what they want. We can build it. She just said, all right, do it. So we built this semi that's basically, the size of a semi-trailer that takes the food to Safeway or whatever. It's got one area, it's got expandable sides of 7 metres by 5 metres. And then we've got a smaller room, a command post. But we also wanted this thing to be able to be used at community events and whatever. So we wanted to be able to take the table out. Now, this table's probably 4 metres long, 2.5 metres wide, and it can hold 10 people comfortably with computers and everything else. So we had 2 companies bidding for this. One guy comes along and he goes, right, we will open the floor and the table goes below the floor. You shut the floor and you've got a 7 by 5 metre open space. It was a bit like something out of the Thunderbirds. And that's what we've got. And we've still got it. And we actually just spent a bit of day refurbishing it. And it's a fantastic resource. We can send it anywhere. So during the fires, Black Saturday, that was our police station at King Lake for about 2 months. It's been good. And now we're going to build 2 medium ones of those, and we're replacing the 10 small ones that we've got around the trap. So yeah, that's the sort of fun part of the job. That's
amazing. Now the question for me, Frank, is around, like we talked about safety and fit for purpose, because you do a lot of things with fit for purpose. The police pod's a really good example, yep. And that move to utes, etc. What about environmental pressures? How big is that an issue for you? And what's the pressure to go green from a government and also from a police perspective?
There's always that pressure. We respect that. And in fact, we think we're a very good corporate citizen in that space. So we play the game in 2 different ways. We actually try to put the pressure back on the industry to provide vehicles that are better in terms of fuel economy. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We really, really wanted to go gas when LPG was the go, if you like, in terms of a better environmental option than the just normal petrol engines. Both Ford and Holden developed dedicated LPG cars, if you recall. We had 450 LPG Holdens in our fleet. And look, we did it in 2 ways. We said, look, okay, you're going to have a spare wheel in the boot. And look, boot space is pretty critical to operational members because they've got a lot of equipment to throw in there. But we said to them, look, you'll get some of that dough back. And in fact, I'll never forget Ken Lay, who became a chief commissioner, came to us with a proposition. He said, if I convert X number of cars, do I get the fuel savings? We said, yeah. He ended up getting 10 extra cars into his fleet because of the savings he generated by converting to LPG, which was then a no-brainer. So, yeah, definitely. We then took the opportunity when Ford came out with the Territory, great car in terms of it gives you height off the ground, a large SUV. They had a petrol variant and a diesel. Well, for some reason, the diesel was on the nose politically, but I've got to tell you, from an economy point of view, they're just a no-brainer. And we did take that opportunity to introduce a heap of them into the fleet. And I don't know if you remember, probably about 10 years ago, there was a real problem with the price of fuel. We projected our fleet out 5 years out where we would, if the price rise in fuel was to go up, we were roughly travelling at about, I think it was $15 million. This is 10 years ago. We would have been hitting the 25 mil by, I think, 2020. And we converted a hell of a lot of cars to diesel. And in fact, our fuel bill is still around the $15 million mark with a fleet that's gone up probably, since that time, we've probably gone up about 500 to 600 vehicles. So our fuel bill's been pretty constant for the last 5 years. And that's probably because we've brought in a lot more European cars with smaller engines but high performing. Absolutely, environmental is a big deal to us. We actually look at a whole of life costs across our whole vehicle fleet when we're actually making those decisions. We look at the cost of the lease, the cost of tyres, cost of brakes, fuel costs, and that sort of helps with our environmental footprint. We will go electric at some point in time. That's just a no-brainer. We're just about to do a study on how that will work in our space. Given that we've got some cars that are on the road 24/7, we will look at the best way to run EVs, whether that means we put solar panels on a lot of our police facilities and have charging points with battery backup. We've still got to do a lot of work on that, but I see that's where we're heading at some point in time. And I see that the industry is going to come out and develop better and more more rapid charging stations than we've got now. And the great thing is the government finally came out and said, well, we've got some targets, which enables the industry to say, oh, okay, they're fair income. We'll start to bring product in. You know, like we deal with the VWs and whatever the world who've all got EV variants overseas. Don't bring any in here because we haven't made those noises that we want them. But now I think you'll start to see a flood of these cars coming in. And as long as we can get the cars that have got the size to store our equipment and the ability to charge them quickly in certain cases, we will certainly head that way.
Frank, a question for me. The perception of petrol cars, do you actually modify them to go faster, or is that just a myth?
So for the purpose of our resale value, absolutely.
They're all chipped, aren't they, Frank? They've all got the chip.
They've all got the chip. So, yeah, you make sure people think that. We don't modify anything, John. We don't modify anything because it's hard enough getting a manufacturer to endorse their product, and we want to be able to drive anywhere in the state and say, fix it. That's why we insist it's got to be a manufacturer-endorsed police pack. So we're not going to go fit a dual battery system or anything that we can drive up to Mildura and they say, no, nothing to do with us. Our members haven't got time for that. I think we might be the only police jurisdiction in the country that doesn't modify anything on the vehicle. A lot of them say we don't need dual battery system. Well, we beg to differ. We want a dual battery system endorsed by the manufacturer so that nothing stops.
No, I was just wondering, even brakes and brake pads and that, you just have standard?
No, they're not. In most cases they are now, but the police pack consisted of a brake pad that the manufacturers endorse. So, for example, Holden would put a heavy-duty brake pad on the front, I think, of every car. And we never had a problem with Holdens. Some other manufacturers, we ran the brake test and their brakes fell apart, the actual pads. So we would say, you either got to fix it or we can't buy your car, which they would. But then that would become a dedicated part number in their system, so that when we'd go and get those brakes replaced, we'd get the police pack brake pad, which meets our braking standard. Yeah. So, yeah, we don't modify, but we do get them modified by the manufacturer. And then we insist on making sure that when you replace it with the manufacturer endorsed thing. Otherwise, you've just invalidated all the testing we've done. That's something that we laugh at because some others don't do that. You know, they'll buy these cars and then they'll go to a cheaper brake pad later. Well, that means it won't brake to the standard that you're requiring, because our cars do get driven rather enthusiastically, if you know what I mean.
Now, Frank, from a retention perspective, because resale you mentioned is a big thing, how long do you retain your cars for?
So, look, we're part of the government fleet as well, so we have to abide by government policy. Many years ago, they introduced a 3-year 60,000K regime. It used to be 2-year 40. You know, this is probably 15 years ago. You'll know better than I, Mark, in terms of the dollar costs associated with leasing. The longer the lease, the cheaper the cost. Vic Fleet run the fleet. They look at the resale values. The cars are getting so much better. They're not falling apart, so to speak, at 60. We then took a decision that when we moved to the Holden Divie van, the VE that you built, we actually moved that to 90,000 Ks. There's the fairly significant fit-out cost associated with that car. We wanted to amortise that cost over the life of the car or the asset. But safety's the primary thing for us. So we actually ran a couple of cars to 90,000. And then we subjected them to the independent engineering tests that we would run the car through before you introduced to the fleet. And the car still performed to our silver standard. We did the same with the Highway Patrol SS Commodore. We ran them to 90, put them through the same performance handling and braking tests, and they were still meeting our standards. So we wanted to make sure that we couldn't be accused of saying, well, you're not looking after the safety of your members by running an old junk bomb. And I got to tell you that the industry has responded really well. So, for example, with the Colorado being pulled, trying to build a new vehicle and getting replacement cars has been pretty tough. So we had some of these cars on the road to 250,000 Ks.
Wow.
Yeah. For the simple fact that we could not get a replacement. So absolutely, you have to get our cars are serviced in accordance with manufacturer servicing, plus they're checked every 5,000 Ks. So you have to go and get your car checked from a braking perspective, undercarriage, make sure that thing's roadworthy and safe to drive. We don't wait for the manufacturer required warranty. We have to check them regularly because the way they're driven, they might have some undercarriage damage that you wouldn't have otherwise seen. And you expect this thing to perform in urgent duty driving. So we've also been subjected to the massive pain that the rest of the government is experiencing. So it's called a financial sustainability program. So we've actually moved virtually all of our operational vehicles to 3-year 90, and that will save us a fair bit of dough Our leasing budget's well over 40 million a year.
Frank, you've spoken a lot about your expectation from a manufacturer to modify and provide you the right vehicle. But can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship and what your expectations of both OEMs, dealers and auction houses? What do you expect from those people in that relationship?
So if you go back to the OEM, we work pretty hard to get them on board in the first place. But John, we don't just say, come along. We actually guarantee a supply. We guarantee a purchase volume. They'll come to us and say, well, if you want us to invest that money in developing the police pack, which they have to do a fair bit of work on that too, because a simple thing like we expect our cars to idle indefinitely. Most manufacturers will cut the 30 minutes. In the past, like if it was a Holden, Mark, I'd just tell him he'd go to Adelaide, talk to the engineers, they'd approve it tomorrow. These guys now have to talk to an overseas owner and master. It took us, I'd say, 2 months to get that approval to extend the idling time on the Ranger to beyond 30 minutes. And the reason we need that is like if you've got an accident at a major intersection on a highway, you're going to have a police car there with lights and sirens, lights going so it can warn the public there's a hazard there. And you've got to have that on as long as you can. We have that arrangement with the manufacturer where we say, we know you're going to spend some money, but we will commit to buying X amount of vehicles. You tell us what works for you from a profit margin point of view, because we don't expect this for nothing, and we know they're not there as a benevolent society, but, so we actually guarantee volume. So if it's worth their investment, we'll buy it. If they don't think it's worth it, we don't buy it, or they won't sell it to you. So that's the first part. The dealers then are part of the process too, because, as you guys said before, some of these cars sit on their floor plan a little bit longer than they would otherwise want. And again, we say to them, this is the business. Do you want that? And the benefit of working with us, we're a pretty large purchaser. So we're the biggest purchaser in the Victorian government fleet. So we're probably 40% of the actual annual changeover of vehicles, and we're probably 30% of the fleet in total. So we do turn over a fair few cars a year. In doing that, if something comes along, we will go to that dealer who's been looking after us and say, hey, I need 10 cars of this. And they might not necessarily be a police pack, but something's come up. So you do value that partnership. The auction houses are slightly different because we're covered by a whole of government contract. So that's run by Vic Fleet again. What we expect is that they actually market our cars so that we get at least the residual value back. I don't see, we don't have much of a thing to do with the auction house. All they do is pick up our cars, repair them to a certain value that we've agreed to with Vic Fleet. But we essentially are part of the whole of government contract there. We don't really have much of an issue with them.
So what you're saying, Frank, when you talked about the police cars are driven vigorously, but on the flip side, you maintain them exceptionally well. There's the standard maintenance plus the additional maintenance that you do and inspections, and you've got extra features in the vehicle which make them safer than, say, a standard OE vehicle, and you maintain it, and then when you dispose of it, you even get refurbishments done for the little fiddly things like little holes in consoles and all that sort of stuff.
Look, we've got a very good contract with our vehicle equipment fitting mob, and part of the contract is you will make sure that the fit is able to then enable us to resell the vehicle as if there was nothing ever fitted to it. So we do stuff like plastic welding, but we actually work with them to actually design our vehicles a lot better than what we used to. So the actual design, it's extremely complex nowadays to the point where we're minimising the amount of holes we drill. We'll actually get stuff that actually fits better into the dash. It's not protruding, so you don't have to screw in. You'd probably replace certain parts there that actually fit more flush with the dash, so it's not extending into the vehicles that could potentially cause harm to our occupants. But they do get resold. The other advantage from our point of view in insisting on these safety features is when you sell the car, I mean, you're putting a car on the road that's then got the best safety features available. You never used to get in a base model vehicle. Nowadays, virtually everything you're getting is 5-star ANCAP. But go back 5 or 6 years, base model cars didn't come with stability control, curtain airbags or whatever. Like I remember when we first bought the VE, the entry-level car didn't have curtain airbags. It only had side airbags. So we argued vigorously with Holden to say, hang on, if you don't give me the curtain, I don't get head protection. I'm only getting thorax protection. So we cancelled our orders until they came back and said, yeah, okay. And that is a benefit back to the public, because then you're getting a car that, your young kids who just turned 18, you're going to give them a shit bomb? No, you're giving them a car that's the safest car you can buy. We actually did some testing once we were getting a bull bar put on a Pajero, and we wanted to make sure that, one, Mitsubishi would endorse it, and two, the airbags went off, right? So we went to a crash test lab in New South Wales, the RTA up there. And, we watched the thing and it all, 54 k's an hour smashes into the wall, airbags deploy, and the bull bar's still okay. So they then endorsed that bull bar. They took us for a walk, and we looked at a 10-year-old Astra compared to an Astra of the day, and I can't remember what year this was. The 10-year-old thing was basically, and it was a front-end collision that they did. There was a write-off and the occupant would have died. The newer Astra didn't even have the pedals coming back into the cabin. So, and then they said, yeah, you see that? And we think, crikey, you buy these sort of shit bombs for your kids. You shouldn't be doing that. It literally changed everyone's perception of what to buy for your kids that day. And the beauty of the cars we've been buying, we've insisted on better safety. That goes back into the community. Slightly good service back to the community, I would have thought. But from our point of view, we're protecting our members, which is critical for us.
Frank, in terms of your role, what do you see as your biggest challenge that you need to overcome?
Oh, look, our biggest challenge is we've got guys out there who are doing a pretty tough job, and the vehicle is their office. So if you look, Victoria's 228,000 square kilometres. So, we've got cars in every corner of the state. So they need to have four-wheel drives, all-wheel drives, sedans, wagons, and they need these things to be equipped that enables them to have all the equipment they need to do their policing work as well as their traffic work and everything else. So our biggest challenge is to put the safest possible cars on the road for whatever particular task our members are doing. We've probably got, I've forgotten the actual numbers, let's say 15,000 members on the road. The car is their office. So that's the challenge, is to give them what they need and to buy the types of vehicles they want. So I don't know if you've seen a police member these days. They're walking around with vests. Now they call them equipment vests as well as being bulletproof. And they've got body-worn cameras. They've got different OC sprays. They've got all these other things that they're attaching to their vest, which basically puts a small person to a big person, because these things increase your circumference by a minimum of 5 centimetres, right? So even the smallest people are now finding it hard to get in and out of a sedan. They can't get out of it. They'll grab the roof to pull themselves out. So we're probably going to change our whole model to move away from sedans to SUVs. But the challenge for us has been, do the SUVs perform to the same dynamic handling requirements as the sedans do? And I can tell you, 5 years ago, the answer was no. We couldn't get the sort of SUVs that met our silver category. So the Territory came out, which was a beauty, but that was at the bottom end of silver. A lot of the other SUVs, you wouldn't run them. They were like boats. Okay, now they're all coming out at what we call a gold standard in terms of stability, and that's the probability of rollover. So we will move our vehicles to that. But the biggest challenge is now supply. When Mark was at Holden, he knew they would have a slot on the production line of, say, 60 cars for Victoria Police and who knows what else for the other states. Because they knew we were going to buy them, and we would just lock in colour, sedan, wagon or whatever closer to the production line. But every month we knew we were going to get our cars built. No more. We're now planning 6 months out. That's a big challenge for your IT systems to make sure they're in sync. You've got to find out the systems that the manufacturers got. You've got to entice them to build the car in the first place. You're dealing with an overseas master, which they don't give a shit about Australia, to be honest. And in the past, we could get away with this having 2 types of cars in our general duties fleet. No longer. We have to have about 6 because we can't get the supply. I'll give you an example. We just did a deal with one of the manufacturers, and they were wrapped. We said, yep, we're going to buy your car. I want 500. They couldn't guarantee 200. In a year, I'm talking, right? Because that's beyond their destiny now. It's more, we're in a global market. So our challenge is that we're now got to spend a bit more dough, because the actual fit-up design for a car ain't cheap. You then got to buy, moulds and whatever for a Ranger. It's not the same as putting it in an Amarok, for example. That increases our costs and the time it takes to get a car on the road. So that's our biggest challenge, getting adequate supply, guaranteed supply, and making sure we're flexible enough to be able to get a number of different manufactured vehicles that meet our standards in to make sure we've got our changeovers happening. It's a bit of a tougher game these days, to be honest.
Very much a balancing act, Frank.
It is.
Where do you see the future for, as far as the police fleet? So you mentioned before that you've grown from 3,000 to 3,500 cars in 10 years. So is it likely to continue growing going? You mentioned also that you will be embracing EVs, but so what does the future hold?
So look, if you're a betting person, you'd say the fleet's going to increase, and I'll guarantee you it will, because law and order is always a bit of a political football. So in the last 10 years, we've had changes of government. Every single one of them's come out saying, I'm going to make law and order a bigger deal and I'm going to increase the police numbers. So for the last 10 years, I think we've gone up every year. But we actually did a deal with Treasury where we said, listen, you can't just say you're going to give us more coppers. You've got to give us computers. You've got to give us office space. You've got to give us supervisors. You've got to give us cars. So we've got a model. So for every extra 6.2 police, we get a car. Okay, so that's guaranteed, and the funding model supports that. Melbourne population continues to grow. The Victorian population grows. That means you've got new suburbs, you need new police stations, you need new members. They need the equipment. The basic equipment is a car and the guns, sprays, etc. So I don't see us going down, and I don't see us going to small vehicles in the sense that, look, when we went from Australian-made to overseas manufacture, we knew we were going to cop a bit of flack about the cars would be slightly smaller. And also you had the bean counters saying you should be running smaller cars because they're cheaper to lease. Well, we actually got an ergonomist in who was highly respected by the union and some of the OH&S bodies around the nation. And this guy, he actually filmed police members getting in and out of all our existing cars. So the territories, the XR Falcons, the Falcon sedans, wagons, Divie vans. And actually you could see, I said before about people grabbing the roof of the car to get out. That's fair dinkum, right? And they also concluded he gave us a set of ergonomic preferences. And the one thing that's stuck in my head is the minimum distance between the B pillar of the vehicle shouldn't be any less than 1330 mils. And that sort of says things like the Holden Cruise wasn't suitable. And it's not hanging shit on the Cruise. The Corolla wouldn't have been a suitable police car either, because you've got to look at the amount of equipment these guys wear and the physical ability to get in and out of these cars. So we've got a set of ergonomic preferences which suggest you can't go to a vehicle that's much smaller than the Passats, the Wagon that we're running now. Yeah, we've got that to back up the type of vehicles we need. We've got a commitment from government that if they're going to increase our workforce, they've got to increase the fleet. Otherwise, we can't deliver those services. We might change the model in terms of you might have some mobile police facilities, which means, you can take the police to the actual areas that need greater looking after. But that depends on the government of the day. One government was saying, yep, we want that. Others have wound back because there's votes in police stations too. I don't see the fleet going backwards. I do see that we will certainly be required to go, to better environmental vehicles. Don't discount hydrogen, by the way. That's going to happen too. A lot of people say you've got to have EVs. You do, but look, the hybrids aren't too bad either. And I think the Camry, we were getting something like 6 litres per 100 Ks out of a Camry. And that's not bad for a hybrid compared to the 10s plus that we were getting out of the normal petrol vehicles. I would think we'd have a bit of a balance. EVs are going to happen though, and I see that will happen big time in the coming years.
And diesel, as far as I'm guessing all of your utes are diesels?
Our diesels are huge. We've got a stack of diesels, yeah. But I see that the world is going to change away from diesel. I don't know how that will go into the utes, but I think you'll find that some of the manufacturers are going to be bringing out EV type utes or hybrid utes anyway. I think Europe are moving away from diesel in the passenger vehicles.
Absolutely, yeah. Diesel in passenger vehicles has dropped right away, and Europe it previously hadn't embraced diesels. It was the solution for them, but diesel passenger have well and truly gone. It's interesting, other markets, whether they be in the Middle East or through Asia and Africa, there's still a big piece for diesel vehicles. So we're just curious to see what was going to happen with yours.
Well, I'll actually tell you right now how many I've got right now. We've got 1,764 diesel.
That is half of your fleet.
It is. That's a fairly big number. So at some point in time, I would see. So, for example, we're running our highway patrol BMWs are diesel. We'd imagine that Beamer at some point in time are going to discontinue those. And I imagine you'll see the same happening with all the utes at a point in time. We'll then just be subject to whatever the industry can provide us. We still need the cars that do the work. We do change with the times, and we can change very rapidly because of the amount of cars we purchase. As I said before, moving to 450 gas cars, we did that within a 2-year time span, which isn't bad. So I expect that when the EVs come out and the infrastructure's there to support us, we'll be okay.
Well, it's interesting when you look at the 3-year term, so you can change your fleet over in 3 years.
But that's the maximum. So our highway cars are roughly, our Divie vans are changing over about, I think, 13 to 15 months. If we can, because they're on the road all the time. The highway cars are probably moving out to about 30 months now. Moving everything to, we would change everything over easily within 3 years, and some well under.
There you go, John. There's a powerful stat because, Frank, we interviewed Ben Sullivan from an organisation called Potentiate, and there's a misconception in the industry, and I was guilty of it, that we thought that retail customers turn their cars over every 3 to 5 years and fleets the same. Well, fleets are around about 5 years, the main ones, but you're unique because yours is actually a lot shorter. So you're even less than 3 years for most of your cars.
Yeah, most of them are.
Whereas retail buyers, it's actually 7.8 years.
Yeah.
So you will have turned your cars over twice by the time Joe Public changes their car. So your cars are significant contributors to the road safety for used car buyers.
And look, can I tell you, Mark, that's a good point. We were actually using that argument a lot with central government for a while when there was some discussion about changing lease terms. And I'll use the example, New Zealand used to run their cars for 7 years, and I think they had a contract with Holden. And we actually pointed out to some of the bean counters and said, that means I would have missed out on traction control in the first instance, side airbags, because we didn't have curtains yet. Then I would have missed out on curtain airbags and stability control. And stability control, the stats were at the time, 30% of accidents involving a death could have been saved by the vehicle having been fitted with stability control. From my point of view, it's a no-brainer to make sure that you're refreshing a fleet like ours, and it's just adding those safer cars into the community. Now you're arguing about whether the thing's got lane departure warning, which is a great thing to do, whether that's a 5-star or not. Well, that's the sort of next level we're going to. So, the new ANCAP standards are going to make it slightly difficult for some of the utility type vehicles, but they're all pretty good. We would have missed out on a heap of safety features in our fleet if we were turning cars over at, 5-year regimes. You could probably argue now, well, it's not as bad. But we've got us out of a bit of trouble, I reckon.
It cannot be understated the positive impact that your cars have on, the used car market, and because the used car market is twice the size of the new car market, whereas your car's coming back, you bring back the newest used cars possible.
Yeah, you would think so.
Versus Joe Retail, who returns their car in 7 years' time. So right now, you're bringing a car back that's 2 years old that I may go and buy. In fact, I did. Versus someone who's buying a car at the same time that is 7 years old. And the car I'm buying from you has all the good safety gear, it's been maintained, and it's a lot younger and still under warranty when you defleet it.
And I think that's the key. And the manufacturer responding by putting out a bigger warranty, which is fantastic too. So everyone's a winner. And don't forget, we've got a chip in the car.
Correct. They're all chipped. They're all chipped.
Yeah, Frank, there's been a most amazing discussion, really fascinating for us. I've learned a huge amount.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. It's been a bit of fun.
Now, Frank, I'm keen to summarise today's discussion and thank you once again for coming on the show. So the Frank Mullally story starts in 1979 where you join the Premier's Department in a HR capacity. So you care about people and you care about managing people, and that's your fundamental skill set. But you also were involved in writing the Code of Conduct for Victorian Government. And then in 2001, you move into the police fleet role. But you moved into that role right when a significant event occurred, and that was the unfortunate fatalities for 2 members in Northcote. And the research that went into that process was, okay, why did this happen and how do we avoid it happening again and protect our members? Because when we look at the key challenges that you're solving in your role, you have an incredible balancing act. You have a financial accountability to the government and ultimately every taxpayer in Victoria, but you have a bigger responsibility, which is the safety of your members. And you go about that with an absolute vigour and commitment that no stone is unturned as far as making sure that you provide the safest workplace for these members. Because ultimately, the vehicle is their office. But in their office, fit for purpose is so critical that they need to be able to carry a huge array of items. And if you look at the vests that these members wear and all the gear, it's hard to get in and out of cars. And if that's the office, you've got to look at workplace injuries, but also making sure they can perform and keep the public that they're there to protect safe as well. So they need to be able to do their job and do it properly and do it safely. So a lot goes into the police cars. And as far as working with the OEMs, the critical piece that you highlight is that you need to have a good, strong relationship, but a commitment. But the commitment works both ways.
Yeah.
You put a commitment in that you will buy X vehicles, and your fleet is 3,500 cars. That's a lot of cars, of which you turn over every 3 years at a maximum. So realistically, these cars get turned over between 18 months and 3 years.
Correct.
That's a lot of cars. So you have a lot of buying power, but importantly, you extend that buying power with a commitment to a manufacturer to give you a solution, because you need the OEM to give you comfort and support and a commitment in return that they will engineer and provide a safe workplace for your members. So you're providing your members a safe vehicle. And then you need that same commitment from the dealers that you engage along the way, because you need a steady and reliable supply of cars. A, from the manufacturer, and B, from the dealer. So the manufacturer brings the cars in, they go to the dealer. Now, sometimes there is this backlog of cars, and that's a cost of doing business if you're a manufacturer. So the manufacturer needs to carry those cars, and so does the dealer from time to time. But the pendulum in this recent 12 months has swung the other way, where you can't get cars.
Yeah, exactly.
That has a knock-on effect, meaning that you've got to keep your cars on the road for longer, but you actually maintain them more than what a standard retail customer or even fleet customer would. There's the factory specified services, but you do additional inspections and services. So your cars are maintained exceptionally well. They're chipped, as we said, but more importantly, they're modified with the manufacturer's blessing with safety features, and that is paramount.
That's important.
You've got those safety elements, but you're also environmentally aware and held accountable to lower your carbon footprint, all the time being financially prudent in the vehicles that you purchase and still balancing that fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So yes, you may have been challenged to let's look at small cars, but small cars aren't fit for purpose with the gear that your members need to use.
That's exactly right.
But you embrace things like LPG, when LPG was provided by local manufacturers. Diesel is half of your fleet right now because it makes sense right now in the current state, but you're also embracing hybrids and EVs, and importantly hydrogen too, because you've identified that hydrogen is a solution where EVs may not be for certain applications.
Exactly right.
Technology is something that you're on the forefront, and also as far as, once again, getting back to safety and fit for purpose. So the question is, you maintain police cars as being good investments as used cars. I think they are. I think they're an exceptional investment, as do many younger drivers where often they're their first car. So highly recommend anyone listening, go to the auctions, look for one of your cars. They're great value for money and you won't be disappointed. And as far as the challenges going forward, the police fleet's not going to get any smaller. It's going to continue getting bigger, because as the population grows, we need more members protecting our safety, and you're keeping your members safe, helping us be safe in what you do. So Frank, thank you so much. It's a credit to you for how you go about it. The challenges, you've had plenty. There's many a curveball, and I'm sure there'll be more curveballs coming. You do it with a smile. You do it with a laugh. You are an industry oracle and legend, and I really thank you for sharing your story on our podcast today.
Oh, thank you, guys. Lovely to meet you, John, and thank you, Mark. It's good to see you again. I must say, one thing it's remiss of me for not saying it, I've got a great team of people who really support the business, and they've all got the same level of enthusiasm, making sure we put the best cars on the road for our guys. And it's critical, because it's a lot, if your team aren't working in the same direction as the organisational priorities, it ain't going to work. And, my guys have been fantastic. we probably don't say that enough in the public service. Yeah, that's brought us a long way, I think.
Thank you for listening today. Hopefully you enjoyed the discussion with Frank Mullally as much as we did. Frank is a living legend when it comes to police cars and fleet operating, and very much a champion of safety in vehicles. If you like what you heard and saw, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube, tick the bell. Also, you can listen to us on Auto Currents, our website. Subscribe to Spotify and iTunes, and look out for updates on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks very much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.